Hey folks, welcome back. With Halloween right around the corner, I figured it was about time I made a video about a scary subject for you all. Will I be talking about a horror movie or a new true crime podcast? Not today, but that's because I have something even scarier for you little goblins. That's now my nickname for my fan base, little goblins. Let's go with it. Fair warning, folks, today I'm going to be talking about something so scary, it puts nightmares in the brain spaces of entrepreneurs everywhere. Today, we're going to be talking about public ownership. And if you're a conservative out there, I apologize for the heart attack I probably just gave you. So yeah, as an avid football fan, if you couldn't tell, I've for a while now been meaning to look into the Green Bay Packers and how their ownership structure kind of functions, so I took a little bit of time this weekend researching everything, and I figured I would share it with you all. And I hope it's especially enlightening to my majority American audience, because in Europe, a lot of sports franchises are publicly owned. It's a lot less rare over there, but here, again, it's the only one of its kind. So I figured it would be interesting to look at how it's structured, what that means for its community, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I hope this topic strikes a lovely middle ground between like sports fans and my largely political audience. Maybe we can come together and just be, oh look, we're so nice to each other. This is such a mutually interesting topic. We're just so many little kisses. So without further ado, let's get into it. When we hear the phrase public ownership, I think a lot of us are tempted to imagine nationalized corporations in countries that in some way are moving towards socialism, but that's not really what we're talking about here. Rather than being the property of an individual, partnership, or corporate entity, they are held as of 2016 by over 360,000 stockholders. Green Bay is the only team with this public form of ownership structure in the NFL, grandfathered when the NFL's current ownership policy stipulating a maximum number of 32 owners per team, with one holding a minimum 30% stake, was established in the 80s. So yeah, apparently this point was surprising to my non-sports plugged-in partner who I called right before this. Each team's owned by like one single person. You know, for example, we'll get to this later, Jerry Jones owns the Cowboys, and then normally there's a couple other smaller owners who own tinier stakes of the company. But I was unaware that it was limited to just 32 people, so they're really interested in keeping this to a small number. But it is kind of telling that their like bylaws make it so that only a select few can really profit from these institutions. Now you might be asking yourself, well, if they don't have an owner, like how does the team literally function? How do they run their business and handle their finances? The corporation is governed by a 7-member executive committee elected from among the board of directors. The committee directs corporate management, approves major expenditures, establishes policy, and monitors performance of management in conducting the business and affairs of the corporation. Now, in a lot of ways, that might not sound like anything all that different from the rest of corporate America. You know, you have a board of shareholders that makes decisions for the company, right? Well, the difference here is that only one person, the elected president, is able to make money off this venture. The rest of the committee and board of directors is whatever this fancy word is that, if it will highlight it for a second, basically means free. They work for free. They don't get multi-million-dollar bonuses while the company fires a bunch of its employees like a lot of other American corporations. I hesitate to call this volunteering, but that's more so what this strikes me as. Now, I briefly Googled the names of some of the people on the board of directors, and they are business people who benefit from the success of the Green Bay Packers, but it's not directly tied to the finances or decision-making of the company. Like, they don't have the same financial incentives and aren't quite driven by the same profit motive that they are in their, you know, businesses that they go back and work for on the regular. Now, you might assume that, like most other corporations, the board of directors get shares, and therefore the shares are where the money's at. Like, sure, they might have a $0 salary, but they get like a hefty shareholder package when they retire, right? While you're correct that they do normally get shares, they're not able to be traded, which sounds weird for stocks, but I'll explain. even though it's traditionally referred to as common stock in corporate offering documents. A share of Packard stock does not share the same rights traditionally associated with common or preferred stock. It does not include equity interest, it doesn't pay dividends, it can't be traded. Shareholders receive nothing more than voting rights, an invitation to the corporation's annual meeting, and an opportunity to purchase exclusive shareholder-only merch. Shares cannot be resold, except back to the team for a fraction of the original price. This is really weird. This was maybe the weirdest part of this deep dive I did to really kind of wrap my head around. Because we hear the name stocks and we think trading on the stock exchange and the penny stocks, all these people making a quick buck off of whatever. And then here you have shares that these board members own, but they can't be traded. And there's really no way to make money off them. But the shares exist in this abnormal space because the reality is they're not meant to be something you make money off of. The goal of the shares in this case is very much community driven. For example, with the fact that you have a cap on how many shares somebody can own, you have 360,000 people who do own stocks, a lot of them being local residents and super fans. And that's because the shares are relatively cheap and because they're not subject to market forces. It's not like you have a corporation coming in and buying it up so they can jack the price up and then sell when it peaks, you know. It's just kind of fans or people interested in having the little placard that says you have a share, buying up the shares. There's no real financial interest in there. And that's because the point is very specifically to take ownership and the value of this franchise out of the hands of the private market and to make it a community-driven thing. Now, some of the more small-time share owners have differing opinions about this, and Sports Illustrated here has a really lovely article interviewing some of those people. One fan is really proud of the ownership structure, saying here, "The benefit that we get is that our team is run by board members and their only real goal is to make money so the franchise survives, and that happens by the team winning." So you don't really have to worry about an owner falling in love with a player in the draft and overriding the general manager. And that's a really interesting approach to the way that this sort of ownership structure exists within larger profit motives. For example, somebody we will eventually come to talk about in this video, Jerry Jones, is much more interested in box office, keeping himself and his team in the headlines at all times. And there has been a lot of points where he's tried to draft players that weren't smart to be drafted at that time, but would have brought in a lot of attention and a lot of money because he sees the direct benefits of that buzz, and while winning certainly would bring him a lot of buzz, the short-term profits that a flashy player brings in can sometimes override that in a way that a franchise like the Packers isn't so much drawn toward. The general manager doesn't see anything from drafting a controversial player or somebody to bring in a lot of headlines, because the general manager is really only driven to do a good job. That is their primary goal, as opposed to having other influences that are driven by money. Another benefit of being a shareholder, aside from, buying exclusive merch if that's your thing, is getting to vote on the board of directors. Meaning there's a pretty immediate, direct form of democracy in the team ownership here. Now, of course, some of the shareholders don't really feel that this is all that big a deal. "I definitely don't feel like part of an owner," says Green Bay native. Let's be real, there are other people that make the decisions, and that's true. You could look at it as a means of getting big fans to buy a $250 piece of paper that they can hang on their wall just to keep the company going. But other people are totally fine with that arrangement and think of it in a positive light purely because of what it provides to a community. My uncle was a financial advisor. He was totally aware of what this is. It really is just a piece of paper. For Stevens, satisfaction of being a shareholder comes from the simple fact that he can be one. And that's a cool advantage of this system as well. It is nice that you can have 300,000 people saying they are a part-time owner of a franchise instead of, for the rest of teams, a maximum of 32. And that's kind of cool. I like that, fans can have a say in the board of directors. If there's somebody who is continually doing bad things or making bad decisions, you can get them out of there. Now, a follow-up question that you might be asking yourself is, so what does the team do with profits? Like, at some point they had to have spent less money on concessions and paying people and coaches and all that. And at some point they had to make like a few dollars more than they spent, right? Where does that money go? Well, normally it would go into the pockets of the owner and shareholders and board of directors, and they decide what to do with it aside from obviously paying themselves healthy bonuses. But the profits from the Packers either have to go right back into operational budgets or have to be donated to the community. And it's important to distinguish, while some owners oh so graciously choose to donate some of the money they extract from these business investments, how much they donate is a choice, and where they put it is much more up to their personal discretion. I bring this up to say that when the profits of these organizations are privatized like this, and crucially, stuck in the hands of, again, a maximum of 32 people, that generated wealth has the potential to be used in less than super helpful ways. Like, there's the obvious result that Jerry Jones takes this money and goes and buys another mansion for himself. Or he goes and lobbies another politician to not let important, climate change measures happen. But even within the realm of charity, which is what a lot of conservatives will turn to and say is a positive of the current ownership structure, you get large sums of money going to some really weird places. Like, I went through the list and I didn't super deep dive into each of them. Like, there's a lot of contributions of like $1,000, $1,200 to various like high schools and stuff, which is really hard to tell where that money's going. But I am going to assume that these smaller donations to high schools and stuff are going to good use, like that it's going to buying a new set of books that hopefully aren't fucking racist propaganda. But I went through and totaled up all the ones that kind of stick out as rather sus, like this right here, the National Football Foundation, which I thought maybe was about some sort of like community outreach. No, it's just about like further developing professional football leagues across the country. It is rather unlike, right below that, a food bank, which you can guess where that money goes to. Or this right here, Razorback Foundation. He donated $400,000 to his and his wife's alma mater. And I thought, oh, is that going to like, help feed students on campus or help house students on campus? No, it's athletic facility upgrades. So I went through and added up all of the kind of sus donations like that, and I found that almost $1.8 million of this charity organization's $5 million went to some really weird places. Whereas the Packers' profits go specifically to either the organization or the Green Bay Packers Foundation, where if you scroll through this helpful little PDF I've linked below, all of their grants go to helpful things like housing, or like there's one here about like giving tribal youth opportunities to understand and further their culture. It's a lot of helpful stuff like that. None of it is about funding like some random person's alma mater or about funding Catholic private schools. And that's because the organization has a lot of public accountability. Like, I'm, for example, totally in favor of money going to Planned Parenthood, which is something they granted a few years back, but there was public outcry. Why? Because the public is involved in these organizations, and I have a feeling that will impact the sort of grants they give out going forward. Obviously, I wish we lived in a world where a cost-effective, like, reproductive center like that wasn't so harshly politicized, but we have a right-wing media and political apparatus to fight against, so not much I can do about that. And that's definitely one of the strengths of this ownership structure to me. Like, I like that there is this public form of accountability for where the money goes, and I like that it is so directly tied to the public. Like, another thing about Jerry Jones's charity is that if you look, most everything is either in some of the big cities, like obviously Dallas, or out of state stuff, which is fine. I don't mean to subscribe to some sort of smaller form of nationality that the only things worthwhile are in Texas. Long Beach be damned, brother. But in contrast, all of the money from the Green Bay Packers foundations has to go to somewhere in Wisconsin. And as you can see, a lot of the rural communities up north or out west sea grants as well. Obviously, there's focus on population centers, but not a single grant went outside of the state. So in that sense, the structure of where the excess profits go is very specifically community driven. As a final point for one of the strengths of this ownership structure, I want to go back to the Sports Illustrated article and read a quote from this initial person talking about how this structure could have been used for other teams. Could Cleveland have reformed the Browns without Jimmy Haslam? That would have been an even better story. It helps create an identity and a community rooting for a common goal with people you might not know. How great would it be if the community supports it instead of through tax subsidies? To me, this is the biggest strength to the Green Bay Packers ownership model. For a city and a region whose growth has been pretty stagnant as of late, it is one of the weirdest success stories of the century that the Green Bay Packers, servicing the smallest market in all of American sports, have somehow managed to stick in Green Bay, and it is 1000% because of the ownership structure. It's not because they have the biggest fans and public pressure would go against them. Plenty of other popular franchises have left, like the Oakland Raiders left twice to go to bigger markets. Because, as plenty of people have documented, kind of the meta for these big teams is to try to leverage the wealth that they bring to an area to get massive tax breaks from the localities. And if and when a given city stops giving them such massive tax breaks, they just up and fucking leave with zero regard for the community they've built or the people they've sort of inspired that grew up there. Because for those teams, of course, it's all about the money. So wherever they can make the most money, whether that's Oakland, Las Vegas, or LA, they'll go there. And that reality of American professional sports has completely decimated a bunch of communities. And if any locality should have lost it by now, it's the Green Bay Packers. It is very specifically because the structure of the organization, from how shares and stocks function to what happens with the profits, creates the most community-driven franchise in all of America. If I'm a season ticket holder, I know that the extra profit made from me buying an armful of hot dogs before each game, don't you dare ask me about my diet, rather than buying some asshole's third mansion, is gonna go to a local food bank or a local after-school activities group. I mean like a YMCA, I don't know why I worded that so weird. It's a really wonderful sort of, localized organization structure, and it's clear that in a region that, because of free trade, I'm gonna take this moment to remind you that free trade was largely a Republican effort led by conservatively libertarian economic arguments. So much of Wisconsin has, since the free trade area, fallen off. You would kind of expected that the team from up north with the tiniest city that it calls home would also have shipped away by now. The market is long since desirable for a team to be built there, yet it's still here. So the structure of this company not only engenders arguably the most passionate, loyal fan base, but it also contributes to keeping the team there. And by leaving control of these franchises to a small group of individuals who very specifically are primarily interested with getting the most money back from their return, you get disloyalty built into the system. And while I don't think the Green Bay Packers organization is perfect, I wish there was more direct democracy involved or more shares, more of a role for the regular people that it champions giving a voice to. It's certainly way closer to a proper organization structure than any other franchise in American sports. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this video wasn't too scary for you. Sorry to any business owners out there, this may have given you quite a shock. I hope it doesn't haunt your nightmares. Now let's turn it on over to the pre-recorded outro piley. Be sure to toss me a like and subscribe down below. But if you really want to help me out, you can join me over on Patreon. Patrons get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, like early versions of every video, and exclusive Patreon-only videos. Plus, if you join the Piley Benton's Biggest Boys tier, you get your name read off at the end of every video, which I am about to do once I pull up the names. Zoth, Revo Pregame, Emily, Kyle Foley, Jennifer Jones, Caffeine Unicorn, Goblin of the Year, Stockwell Homestead, Nillik Elites, and Cameron Fordo. So if you want to hear your lovely name read off at the end of every video, be sure to join me on this specific tier. Thanks much, everyone, and I'll see you next time.